Alright everybody, welcome back to another Ask a Dev Unreal Engine live tutorial. My name is Kevin and we try to do these pretty much weekly. So we have just the right amount of crazy to do these. I say this all the time, to do live tutorials. They always go fun. Something always goes sideways and we always kind of work our way through it, which is hopefully most of the time it's good. We are continuing our Fog of War adventure. And today we're going to be talking about three different things. Specifically, we're going to revisit a quick recap, some stuff about masked materials versus translucent materials. Then we're going to do a second method for doing Fog of War, which I think you all are going to think is a massive cheat, but it works. And then our third big piece of what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using Niagara. We're going to be doing a bunch of Fog of War with Niagara, which should be a lot of fun. So with that, I kind of want to get going because we have a lot to do. But before we do that, quick shout out everybody in the community. Thank you so much in so many different ways helping make this possible. As always, we have the Patreon links and the tips and super chats and everything, but we also have the Discord, and there's a lot of people who are helping out in Discord. Some of our returning heroes like Simplex, Fane Kid, Naroda, Jack, everybody just hopping and helping each other out. But we also have some new people hopping in and helping out this week too. Greg C is coming up, helping out a lot. So is Laxatory. So thank you for all that you do in the forums. That's fantastic. As well as a shout out to two of our newest Patreon members. We've got Julian and Trunchian. I hope I said those names right. As always, thanks for your support. Thanks for helping this channel stay alive and possible. So, like I said, we have a lot to do. Pretty sure I said my name is Kevin. So let's get going. All right, so here we are in Unreal Engine. If you recall, what we are doing is we have our Fog of War. Our Fog of War currently works as a giant plane that we've got that we make a cutout out of. And we have this Fog of War material, which is very basic. It is literally a location space. We're using a sphere mask that has a gradient and we're feeding that into a translucency. Now, there's two reasons why I want to revisit this. One was the performance conversation, and the other one was the masked material part of that conversation. So, if we look at this, what I wanted to do was I wanted to show you all, if I press F5, last time we did this, when we pressed F5, this was all white. This time it's red. I haven't changed anything. I think the only thing I did was I went ahead and shut down a bunch of systems I wasn't using. So I've closed all my tabs, I've done everything. The bottom line here though is we used to be in the extremely bad. We generally don't want to be there, but we're still in the bad place. We don't want to be in the bad. We would love to be in green generally with Overdraw. For a quick recap or info, Overdraw deals with GPU and how each pixel gets drawn. And especially when you're dealing with true translucency, you have one and then you have to draw the pixel behind it and the pixel behind it. If you have 5 of the same thing drawing on top of each other, it gets expensive. Now, one of the things is, even though we're talking about this, I do want to draw your attention to, if we press the backtick key, that's the one below the escape key, and we type stat FPS, what that's going to do is it's going to pop up a frames per second display up here. So even though, let's go back to fully lit. So even though we have this translucent material, our FPS, I want you to note this as our baseline. We're basically looking at about 120-ish. It's pretty good. So even though Overdraw seems to be in the bad place, I'm not worried about it right now. And for this visual, I'm happy to keep the pretty translucent one considering this frame rate. But even though that's true, we are going to, now that we've taken a minute, we're not in the heated battle of doing a live tutorial. Wait a minute. Yes, we are. We are going to revisit the masked version of this material. So let's go ahead and do that. So if you recall, this was our material. Let's go back and let's just duplicate this. And we're going to call this Fog of War masked. Now, when we go into the masked material, what we need to do is we need to change this to be, rather than translucent, let's just make it masked. We can keep everything else here, that's fine. And then we have our surface. Now, what we want to connect this to though, is rather than connecting it, and I like to make this our square. Also, let me just double check that we're at, yeah. Let's make this a little bigger for you all to read. Okay. Because we're doing this mask now, all we need to do is we need to feed this into the opacity mask instead. Now the way the opacity mask works, I'm going to change this down to 100 so we can see it. You'll see it creates a completely pristine cutout. There's no fade at all to this. So as a result of that, if we go back to our level and we first we assign this material to our fog of war plane, we click on that, let's get rid of this. We had some problems when we did this last time. So if we go fog of war, masked, compile and save that, let's save, apply and save our material and press play. You'll notice we have this cutout, but then we also had this double circle thing, cast shadow, and when we walked around we were having all kinds of problems. And at the time, once again, I wasn't in the mindset to troubleshoot that. So real quick, there are a couple of ways I wanted to highlight that we can fix that. So in our fog of war, what we can do with our plane, one way, and I swore we tried this last time, is just to turn off shadows. So let's turn off cast shadow, compile and save, and press play. And now you'll notice that our plane actually doesn't have any of those draw problems, and it works as expected, which is great. All right, now let's go back. A couple other things. I'm going to turn cast shadows back on because I think this will work. There was one other method that I sort of hinted at that I thought I remembered doing, but Unreal's so deep. I've spent so many hours in so many aspects I've already forgotten how I did it. But if we go back, there is an idea of lighting channels in Unreal Engine. And the cool thing about that is you can choose to have an object that is, for example, let's say you want your character to have a special spotlight on it, but you don't want it to affect the environment. That's what lighting channels are for. So currently this plane is part of lighting channel 0. Everything's in 0. If we just move it to 1, when we go back and we play, it's ignoring. Like, it's not getting any of the standard lighting stuff. I have cast shadows turned on still, but it works now because it's basically not receiving any of the lights. And so I'm getting this nice clean circle without any of the problems. Now, the other thing I would like to draw your attention to is when we bring up our overdraw stuff, everything is green. Everything is good. Green is good. So there is a significant overdraw impact, at least in the sense that we were in extremely bad, and now we're going from bad to good simply by changing to a truly masked, which means the pixel is either on or off. That gives us a super green overdraw, which is great. However, once again, I'd like to point out from a FPS standpoint, I'm not worried about it. Right now, our frames per second, they haven't gone up. They're the same as what we were dealing with before. So I'm personally happy if I have the graphics card and the ability to do it, depending on the target platform and all those kinds of things, I'll keep the nice pretty one. But just in case we can't keep the nice pretty one, let's go back to our material, make a couple more changes here. I'm going to change this radius back to 100. And what we were trying to do before was we were trying to use a dither. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this dither, just so you understood what it was that we're looking at. So when we plug the dither in, basically the way this works is it looks transparent, but it's not. What it's doing is it's kind of like, it's changing the color of some of these pixels, and it's also getting rid of some pixels around it, so it looks like it's sort of semi-transparent. Something in my eye, sort of semi-transparent, but it's not really transparent. These pixels actually are solid. And so as a result of that, when we apply this material, oh, actually what I want this to be 400 again. 400. When we apply this, apply and save, when we go back to our game and we press play, you can see we get kind of a fall off gradient, but it's not really there. It's not quite real. And you'll notice that as we move, you can see those pixels kind of crawling. Now, that might be good enough for mobile when you're worried about performance and all those kinds of things. But again, for the machine I'm on and the work that I'm doing right now, I'm happy to keep the transparency one because it works for me. So with all that, we've kind of revisited, recapped what we were doing. Now let's switch we're going to switch gears entirely. We kind of touched on the performance things. We have a baseline. We know where we are again. Let's go to method 2, which is It's gonna be interesting to see if you all even count this. All right, here's what we're going to do. Let me just save everything. And what I want to do is in this level, I'm going to delete this fog of war actor. All right, now, where is this coming from? So in film, there is this idea, especially before all of these 3D scans and everything like that, there is the idea of something called an image plane. And what it is if you take your camera and you take a picture from it, and then you take that picture and you align it perfectly to the digital camera that's in the computer, it's often called an image plane. What you'll have is you'll have a representation of the shot footage. Usually you use this, for example, you would film a shot as Spider-Man swung through the streets. Then you'd have those are called your plates. Those are your background elements. And then we have to put Spider-Man in there. So you have the real world shot footage in the background and you have Spider-Man in the foreground, and then you composite it all together. Well, you can have image planes that are in front of the character and behind the character. So what if we just took an image plane and we put a hole in it? Wouldn't that work? And my answer is yes, it's totally gonna work. And you all may think that this is the biggest cheat ever, but we're still gonna do it. All right, so we got rid of our fog of war actor because we don't need it. What we're going to do is inside of our top-down character, we don't even need the event tick. Let's go ahead and take this. We're going to use event tick for something else later. So let's just take this and comment this. We'll call this the plane actor method, for example. Okay, so we got rid of tick. We don't need it. Now in our viewport, what I'm going to do is here's our camera. Our camera's way up here. Okay. I'm going to create a plane. So let's add a plane. And let's rotate this 90 degrees in Y, I believe. And then let's move it out in front. You don't have to move it. It's too super far forward. We just need to move it so it's in front. If we go back to our level and we press play, we see a white kind of plane, but it's not all the way there. This is too close. So let's go out a little bit further. Press play. There we go. We have this plane. It's now covering our whole screen. If I go to wireframe, you can see our character's still in here, but we can't see through it. So what we want to do is we need to create a material that basically has a hole in it. That's it. That's all we're going to do. So if we go in here, I'm going to call this the image plane stuff. So we're going to call this fog of war image plane. And this one is going to be pretty straightforward. And we have the same options, translucent, opaque, all those kinds of things. We'll stick with a surface of, let's do translucent. I don't even think we need it to be lit, but we can leave it lit, that's fine. And then as far as what the opacity is going to be set by, well, let's just do this. We'll do hold 3 and left click. That's going to give us a vector 3. Feed that into our base color. I'm going to change this to a square so I can see what I'm working with. Now let's create a radial gradient. Radial gradient exponential. If we right click and we start previewing this, you'll see what this looks like. And let's go ahead and create a couple of variables for us to use for the radius and the density. Okay, so if we set our radius to 0.5 and our density to 1, you can see kind of what the circle looks like. If we do a density of 5, you see the circle gets a little bit more solid. All right, now if we take this and we just simply connect this to our opacity, what that's going to give us is going to give us a white dot in the middle. So we actually need to flip this. So wherever it's white, we want it to be black and black to be white. So in this case, all we need to do is a 1-, and this should flip this around when we connect this in. We stop previewing. We should see a hole in our material, which we do, which is great. So now we just have to get the sizing right and assign it to our plane. So let's go back to our top-down character. Here's our plane, and let's replace the material that's on there. Now you'll see the circle is already there. It's already showing up, which is perfect. If we go ahead and we press play, the circle is too big. We can't actually see that it's even a circle. It's not giving us fog of war. So let's make that smaller. So if we go back to, actually we can do this live by, okay, so let's press play and then we'll undock our image plane. basically. Our image plane material, that is. Okay, and let's just try making these updates. So right now our radius is too big, so let's try 0.2. Apply. And interestingly enough, still not seeing it. Maybe it is actually, there we go. So there's 0.1, it's coming in, that's still a little bit too big. Let's try 0.05. Click apply. Okay, so somewhere between 0.05 and 0.1. So let's try a 0.075. See if that gives us something that's a little bit more reasonable. There we go. We'll call that close enough. So just like that, we have our new image plane. And our image plane moves with the camera. So it works. However, we're having the exact same problem that we had before, where when I click, my character doesn't go there, and you can even see the blue, they're called the fingers, that where you end up going, that blue little image, it's actually showing up inside the camera. That's because this plane has collision turned on, so we need to turn all that off. Now, we can actually just turn it all off. We don't even need collision on this plane at all. So if we come down to collision, we can just say no collision, no collision, compile, save, and play. Now our character works properly and moves around. So that's it. It's that easy. Literally stick a plane in front of the camera, put a hole in it, and there you have Fog of War. So I don't know if you all are going to count that one, but that is, I realized as I was thinking about it that this is another way to do it. Now, one of the differences, remember, with this one is, in this particular case, the Fog of War circle is aligned with the plane of the camera, not with the level. So there is a little bit of a tilt offset difference between the two that we've done so far. And then also, just for fun, if we press F5, you'll notice that our overdraw stuff is the same as the plane that was kind of laid across the level. So from that standpoint, we haven't changed anything about the way that works. That all looks great. Okay, so that's it. That wraps up section, or part, like method 2, or you can call it 1 1/4 if you want to, if that was too easy. But now we're going to get into the fun stuff, and we're going to do a Niagara Particle system Fog of War. Now, I know a lot of people, Niagara seems like a lot to wrap our heads around, so we're just going to walk through it step by step, and it'll also hopefully help serve as a little bit of an introduction to how Niagara works and things like that. But before we get started, we do need to go ahead and get rid of our plane, so we're back to a clean scene. All right, we just have our character walking around. Okay. Here's the plan. We're going to go through this step by step, like I mentioned. So let's start with getting rid of our old stuff. I had done a bunch of this stuff previously, and it all crashed and died. So I've done this a few times now in this preparation. So here we go. We have an empty VFX folder, which is cool. And what we need to do is we need to create some Niagara. Now, there's a couple things that you need to understand about Niagara. Niagara is actually really cool. It is, compared to Cascade, which was the old way, I like to think of Niagara as the non-linear editor of the VFX world. It works a lot like a crazy combination of Adobe Premiere, video editing stuff, etc. And I think it's very powerful, and I'm going to try to highlight a couple of things that will hopefully help it feel a little less intimidating as we go through this. So here we go, back to Unreal. We have a VFX folder. Let's just right click and start with our understanding. Niagara, generally speaking, there are two main parts of it. One is the emitter and one is the system. The emitter is the building block, okay? The emitter is the thing that actually emits the particles. The system is more like the sequence and the collection of all the different emitters together that make up the Niagara system that is going to be played in your scene, for example. All right, so first we need an emitter to start with. So if we click on Niagara Emitter, we get our default options. I am going to choose a fountain. I'm going to explain here why in a second. Okay, I'm going to call this Niagara Emitter Fog. Let's call it Fog of War. Fog of War. Okay, now if we take and we drag this and drop this emitter into our scene, it did not. Well, it didn't do it. First off, that was interesting. Compile. Okay, so here's our emitter. It's a fountain. Let's save that. Let's go back to our scene. I think I should be able to drop this in here. Oh, I can't because I haven't put it in a system yet. All right, let's do that. So first, this is our emitter. We're going to go over all of this. Okay, and as you can see, it's a fountain. But I want to be able to put it in the scene. So let's create our system to go with this. So under VFX, let's go ahead and create a Niagara system. And we can choose the Fog of War emitter as our starting, and we'll create this. And I'm going to call this the Niagara System Fog of War. Fog of War. All right, and in here, what I want to show you the difference. So this is our emitter, literally has just the emitter in it, and our Fog of War has the system plus any number of emitters in it. Now I'm going to come back to this in a second, but for right now, let's just double check that everything is on track. If we drag our particle system into our level, you can see that it's working already, which is cool. All right, now our goal is to make this particle system fill the entire space. We want this whole space to be so filled with particles that it looks like fog. That's what we're going to do. Okay, so let me compile and save the system. Now, here's one of the common things that people run into in the understanding between emitters and the systems. When we go into the emitter, if we make a change in the emitter, generally speaking, if we have not changed anything in the system, everything we do in the emitter will automatically update the emitter that's in the system. There's an inheritance here, like almost like a child-parent thing, all right? If we make changes here, they will auto-populate to the Fog of War system. So I'm not going to touch the system anymore. I've compiled it, I've saved it, we're just going to leave it here. So as I make these changes to this emitter, we should see them show up in our top-down game. All right, now Niagara's pretty cool. So here we basically have our emitter. These are all the crazy things we can use or do with our emitter. This might be intimidating, but we'll walk through each of them. Down below we have our timeline. Generally speaking, the way the emitters work is it's kind of top-down. This is all about spawning the emitter. This is all about setting up the particle. This is all about when the particles update, and this is going to be the materials. And usually you kind of work your way down from the top on the way down. So one of the first things we're going to take a look at is we're going to take a look at our emitter spawn rate. Now currently 90 is not going to be enough to fill this volume in any kind of time. So let's change this to 1000. Okay, so we have a lot more emitters. That's great. But we don't really want them in the shape of a fountain, do we? So if we come down to our particle system, we'll notice we have our initialized particle. This is going to be sizing, color, etc. And then we have our shape. And you'll notice that our shape is currently set to a sphere. I'm going to set this to a box. And for this box, I think I want this box to be, hold on. Let me see how big I want this box to be. 4,000-ish. Okay, 4,000 by 4,000. Okay, when I do that, you'll notice all those particles now spread out into a giant box. If I compile, apply, and I look at the level, you can see this actually now is filling the space, but they're not dense enough yet, or they're not big enough. There's a lot of different ways we could potentially fill this. But the other thing I want you to notice is when I have the particle system selected, look at where the center is. It's in the middle of the particle system. This is another thing that I want to update. So let's go back and see if we can figure out how to do that. All right, so we now have them in a box. Now, if we take a look at our emitter, let's see, where is this? Here it is, down here under shape location. It was part of the shape location. Okay, right now the box midpoint is at 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. We can set this as 0, 0, 0. And what this is going to do is this is going to move the box to have its corner be the 0 point. So if we look, you'll notice now that our box has the manipulator down in the bottom left corner. The reason I like that in this particular case is if I zero it out, it's right at the corner of the map in this case, because our map is at 0, 0. Now I do want to move this off the ground a little bit, just so we have it, and I can see what's going on. And now we can start to tackle some of the other things that are happening in this emitter. Once again, realize we are only changing the emitter. We haven't even touched the system yet. And that's because we haven't overridden anything in the emitter in the system, so it all just comes through for free, generally speaking. So a couple things we can look at here as we're looking at our particles. We actually don't want them going up and coming back down. So let's get rid of gravity. We don't want gravity. We don't need drag. And we don't want this, right now they're just launching into space. So we don't need that either. So we can get rid of our velocity in a cone. And we're basically left with particles that are now just spawning within this box. Now, what is the height of our box? 100. I think we could probably take this down to 10, just so that they're compressed into a smaller, tighter space. And this is going to start to look a little more dense. Okay? However, still not enough. When we play, this does not fill the whole thing, not even close. So we need to go more. We need more. So there's a couple things we're going to change. Let's change the size of our particles. Let's make them bigger. Not maybe a little bigger than that, 375. All right, so now we have 75 and 375. Okay, it's filling up the space. That's kind of working. If we compile and save this and we look, okay, now we're getting there. Now our space is starting to feel pretty full. Now we have some problems because they're like popping on and off and everything like that. Why is that? There's a couple reasons for this. Okay, if we look, you'll notice that our emitter has a lifetime of 2. So as a result of that, every 2 seconds, what's happening is it's kind of restarting. So that's not going to work for us because we want this fog to be more persistent. So I'm going to do something crazy, and I'm going to do a whole bunch of 9 bajillion. Okay, so now our fog of war lifetime, the loop time is some crazy number that we're probably never going to get to. But our particles are still popping on and off. So what's happening here is that our particle lifetime, if you look at it, our lifetime min is 1.4 and our max is 1.75. That's a little bit short for what we want to be doing. So we're going to change this a little bit, and we're going to go something a little bit higher, maybe 6 and 12. And let's compile and apply this. And when we do that, these particles are going to last long enough where they really start to fill in. So if we go and we look at it, you can see this whole space is starting to get filled in. All right, once they spawn, they tend to sort of stick around for the most part. Now there is a couple other things that are happening here. If we take a look, let's see what's going on with our color scale. Look at what's happening. Our color scale is fading out, but we don't want our fog to fade out. We want our fog probably to fade in. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to flip this. Let's take it so that at the first frame it's 0, and by frame, the last frame, it's 1. Now by frame, what do I mean? The duration of this fade, you'll notice here under the curve index, is the particle's normalized age. So what does that mean? It means that normalized means we remap it to be 0 to 1. So if our particle age or lifetime is, let's say, 10 seconds, 1 is 10 seconds. All right, 0.5 would be 5 seconds. That's what normalized age means. So in this case, this particle is not fully fading in till somewhere between 6 and 12 seconds because our particle lifetime is somewhere between 6 and 12. So what we want to do is we want to change this to happen much quicker. I am going to change this to be somewhere around the 0.1 time frame. So this comes in a lot further. All right, so we get a nice fast ramp up. Okay, compile and apply. Let's save just in case. Let's just save all just in case. Go back to our level. You'll notice that it fades in much faster. All right, so we're getting there. Our particles are looking pretty good. They're kind of sparkling a little bit. We're going to address that here in a second. But one of the other things that would be nice is maybe if they did move slightly. Reason being is because it's a fog. So let's go ahead and add back in our velocity. So here under particle spawn, let's just type velocity. Velocity, add the velocity. Now, the velocity that we add, anything we type in here, over here, our velocity mode is linear. Let's just say I did 10 in X and 10 in Y. The problem with this is every single particle is moving the exact same. Actually, we don't want any Z because we don't want it moving up. I'll explain that. That will become clear why. We don't want it moving up because we want it to basically be compressed within our level, and because we are going to be cutting out the area around where the character is, we don't want to have particles floating way up in the sky. All right, but back to what I was talking about with the movement. If we make these particles, if I take these particles and I make them smaller, so where's our sizing? So let's just go 5 and 10, just so you can see this. You'll notice they are all moving the exact same direction. They're not random. It's kind of not really what we want for the fog. So what we're going to do is let's go 75 and 375. Again, we'll bring that back. We're going to change this velocity. And this is one of the other cool things that happened with Niagara. The ability to do this thing where you can come in here and you can say random range. Let's go random range vector. So this gives us a random vector on all 3 axes. And so what we can do here is we can say minimum velocity is 1 in X, but you could even do negatives here. 1 in Y, for example. And then we can do 25, and let's say 5, and we'll call this a 0. And now these are going to be moving kind of randomly. Now we could even go negative 25 and negative 5. And then some of our fog is going to go left, and some of it's going to go right, etc. The point is, we're using this random value for each particle. Every single particle that spawns is going to say, hey, give me a random velocity that is between negative 25, 25, and negative 5 and 5. So let's see what this looks like in our level now. Okay, we got a little bit of movement. That's cool. Okay, we have some Z fighting going on, but I'm not worried about that right now. And we've got all of that stuff set up. All right, so let's take a look at our color scale. That's our alpha. I want to see if we've got everything done in here that we need to get done. Okay, so right now our particle is, it's mostly drawing. We're not getting the colors we want, so we could actually change this to black, and we'll be getting our black particles because this is going to be a fog of war. So compile and apply, and when we look at this, that looks pretty good. Now we're getting there. Now we're going to need to lift it up a little bit to make sure we get the top of these towers and our character's head, but we can make it fill the volume and stuff like that once we get there. Okay, getting there. Now, next thing we need to do, remember what I said, this is a fog of war. We want to be able to put a cutout around where our character is. So how do we do that with Niagara? Well, you can do something called a kill particles in volume. So under particle update, we can do, if we type in here kill, we're going to kill particles in the volume. And the volume is going to be a sphere. And I think the radius, a reasonable radius for this is going to be 600. Okay? And what I want you to take notice of here is the origin offset of 0, 0, 0. Compile and apply. Look what happens when I zoom out. Notice this bite out of the corner of our particle square. This down here. This is our kill particles in volume. If we go, that's probably too far. Let's say here, you can see I moved it over, and now I can move it up. Let's move this into the middle. That's probably too far. Let's try 800. So see, here's our volume. So we're getting there. 2000's too much. Sure, let's call it 1600. Let's go down to 1000. So we now have a nice carve out because we're basically destroying all the particles that are within that spherical volume. And if we press play, you'll notice, actually I haven't pressed play yet, you'll notice that I kind of lined it up where I thought the middle was going to be for our character. And so we can walk around in here, and this is, now we're starting to see it. Now we're starting to see a fog of war. However, there's a couple things we need to be able to do. We need to be able to control where this kill volume is, where those particles are going to get destroyed. So just like with materials, we can send values into Niagara as well. We can do those with particle parameters and whatnot. So here's what we're going to do. And this gets a little bit tricky. This is what we want to drive, this origin offset. But we can't really do it in here. We need to do it in the system. So what we're going to do is in our Niagara system for fog of war, you'll notice that when I click on fog of war, just like we had below, all of the values are everything that I've done so far. If I look at kill particles and volume, even the values have come through. I want to replace this with a user parameter. So here's what I'm going to do. Over here on the left for our system, I'm going to create a user exposed parameter. This is going to be make new, and we're going to call this a vector. This is going to be a vector. And this is, let's call this fog of war location, like so. Now, in order to say, hey, this is what drives this value, you just drag it over here and onto this spot. And so now this origin offset is being driven by the fog of war location. However, our fog of war location is not set anywhere. So we need to make a blueprint for our fog. So let's go back and do that. Let's take this system and delete it. We don't need it in here. Let's go back to our blueprints and let's take fog of war. Let's duplicate it. And I'm going to call this fog of war VFX. Already exists. Say it ain't so. Oh, we did. That's a result of our crash. Delete that one. Okay, so here we go. Delete this. I mean, duplicate this. Duplicate this. We're going to call this fog of war VFX. Now, our starting point is the same as where we finished with the planar ones instead. And what we've got is we've got our begin play. And in begin play, we create our dynamic material and we set material. We do not need this for the particle system version of it. Then in our update cutout location, what I want to draw your attention to is even though we duplicated the blueprint, look at the difference here. Our cutout location for the fog of war has this blueprint interface messaging icon up here, but our cutout for the fog of war VFX does not. We need to recreate this. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and delete it. I'm also going to delete this plane because we're not using a plane in the VFX version. We're going to be using the Niagara system. So let's add a Niagara system. Niagara Particle system. All right, and the one that we want is we want our Niagara system fog of war. You can see it here in the viewport. Compile. It's all over there. All right. Now, what we want to do is in our event graph, we still have that blueprint interface messaging system that allows us to talk to fog of war actors. You can see it over here. We can call update cutout. We have to redo this because when we did the duplicate, it didn't bring that over. So let's just right click on this and implement this event. Now, what we're going to do here is quick break. I'm starting to lose my voice already. Okay, so what we want to do is we basically want to set that Niagara parameter. So if we drag off of our Niagara system, we can do set vector parameter, set vector parameter. Okay, and what we are going to set it to is we're going to set it to the location that gets passed in. And what's the parameter name? If you remember, it was the fog of war FOW location. Okay. So now that we've set that up, what we want to do is compile and save this, and we need to drop our new fog of war VFX blueprint onto our level. So let's just drop this in here, and you'll notice that it kind of fills out in space. Let's just zero everything out, and then I am going to move this up. I'll move this up so that it covers the top of these pillars when it draws. That's pretty close. Okay, so moment of truth. Let's see if we got everything connected. We did not. We are missing something. So what is it that we are missing? Our top-down character, event construction. We're not actually calling the cutout. We need to call this update cutout. So over here in our event graph, we can copy this and paste it here. So on tick, we're going to call update cutout. And where do we want the cutout to be? We want it to be where our character actor is, where the mesh is. So I'm just going to copy our mesh, get world location, and we'll put this in place. So here's what we're going to do. Our top-down character on every tick is going to send a message to the Blueprint Interface Fog of War messaging system. It's going to say, hey, update the cutout for an actor, which we're missing here. Okay, so what's our actor? Well, in this case, let's get an actor of class, and this is going to be Fog of War VFX. Now, right now, I don't really want to get this actor of class on every tick, but there's only one of them, so this is going to be plenty fast for the demo, but we should set this up and store it as a variable and do all those things. But for now, let's just get the one, and we'll feed this in. So now we're sending the message to the Fog of War Blueprint Interface messaging system saying update the cutout for the actor, the Blueprint Fog of War. We should probably check to see if this is valid, just in case we don't have one in the level, just to cover our bases here. We're good to go. Now, then what's going to happen is it's going to send that message, and the Fog of War VFX actor says, ooh, I know how to talk to those messages, so I'm going to set the Fog of War location on our Niagara system. So let's see if we're there now. Look at that. Okay, so now as we walk around, you can see our destroy volume, our spherical radius of no Fog of War, is totally working to update our stuff. And the cool thing is, because our Niagara system is actually constantly spawning new particles, it fills in where we were just at. So it kind of fills in behind us where we just came from, which is actually kind of cool. So I think this radius is a little bit big. So I'm going to go back here and let's change that slightly. Let's try 500 instead. See if that feels a little bit better. How are we doing for time, you all? We are at... Okay, we're doing all right. We're tracking. We're making games. Okay. So 500 feels better. I think 500 feels better. Okay, but there are a couple things that I do want to address. So what are those? And actually, interestingly enough, it's probably worth checking. Yeah, so the particles are pretty high above the character's head. So as a result of that, they're going to, the amount of radius of our cutout sphere is actually a little bit, in fact, we can probably see this if we go and we run up this. I think the circle is going to seem bigger when we're on top of this pillar than when we're not on it. So it's roughly, let's see. It's not that big a deal. It's not noticeable. I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, now let's talk about a couple other things. When we first press play, it takes a while for all these particles to come in. It would be really cool if we could start with a bunch of fog already in place, and we can. So let's talk a little bit about the difference between spawning a spawn rate, where what it's doing is it's spawning 1,000 particles every time, versus, I'm sure you've seen this if you've looked at Niagara Systems before, spawn burst instantaneous. So let me show you the difference. If we turn off our spawn rate, we have a spawn burst instantaneous. It is spawning one particle. Let's spawn 20,000 particles. Okay, so what that means is instantly at frame 0, can we do -0.1? No. Frame 0, what we're going to do is we're going to spawn 20,000 particles. So let's go back and press play. See how they're all kind of there? The only reason they're not there faster is because they're fading in. But very quickly we get this quick fade in looking effect, and it's a result of the fact that our particles are spawning in and instantly 20,000 of them. But where did they all go? Well, remember, our particles have a lifetime, somewhere between 6 and 12 seconds, randomly for each one. So it spawns 20,000 particles instantly, and then that's it. The reason that's it is because it wouldn't spawn another set until the end of our loop. But remember, we set our loop time to be like a bajillion. So when we never come back to the beginning. So our particle system never resets. So there's a couple things that are kind of cool to at least point out here. If we did something like change our lifetime, and rather than having it be random, we set it direct set, and we set it to a bajillion. Oh, actually, that is going to mess up our fade in. So let's turn off our scale color so that they just come in. Because what I want to show you is a cool effect that happens now. So when we press play, we're here, done. Now, because we have only spawned one set of 20,000 particles, and they have a lifespan of a lot longer, now when we move through the fog of war, we basically get rid of it and it never comes back. So this would be a method to create a fog of war where once you've walked through it, you can go back to where you came from and you'd still be able to see. Because the particles that were spawned as part of that initial instantaneous spawn, they're now gone. We've destroyed them by walking through the volume. So you can see everywhere you've been. So I wanted to flag this as a potential mode. This is not the goal for what I'm trying to do today. So we're going to go back and we're going to change this back to the random 6 to 12. And we have our spawn burst instantaneous at 20,000. And I'm going to bring back our spawn rate. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to give us the best of both worlds. So now when we play, when we first start, all the particles are here. And as we walk through them, it will fill back in. Now you'll notice that the fill in is actually happening pretty chunky. And that's because we have to turn back our scale color so that they fade in. Save, let's save all just for safety and go. Okay, so now we have our fog of war, it's working. And when we walk through it, you'll see it kind of fades back in, which is perfect. So we're really close, you all. Like this is a totally fun way of doing a fog of war using Niagara Systems. Now, there's a couple of things that we can do to make this even better. So right now we have these big giant circles that represent our fog of war. We could take this up a level, kick it up a notch. If you ever watch Cooking with Emerald, but anyways, and we could actually make these rather than globby spheres, we could make these clouds. So, but before we do that, what I want to show you is one more quick look at our overdraw. Extremely bad. Now, even though this is extremely bad, the reason this is extremely bad, by the way, is all these particles are spawning on top of each other. They all have transparency, and so it's having to calculate the color of every single one all the way through. And so when you start stacking particles, it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. But what I want to point out is if you look at our frame rate, we're still above 100. This is fine for what I'm doing. You can make your own decision. Now there's ways to fix this, just like we did with the circular cutouts on the planes. We can change the material that's assigned to our particle system. So let's go ahead and make a couple of those changes. So if we come back to our VFX, let's create a new material. And I'm going to call this material fog of war particle translucent. And maybe we want to put this in our materials folder. Yeah, we'll probably put this in our materials folder, just so we're consistent. Okay, so now let's take a look at our translucent. Where did that go? Here we go. Fog of war translucent. So here's what we're going to do in here. We are going to, much like we did before, change a couple of these settings. This one's going to be translucent. And basically this is generally going to set it up to be a lot like the default sprite particle, but in this case we're going to be doing it by hand, so you also can figure out how all this stuff works. This particle is fairly straightforward. Usually when you're working with a particle system, the color for the material should come from the particle system. So if you right click in here, particle, you can get the particle color. So we're going to feed the particle color into here. All right, and then what I want to do is I want to create a soft border. So let me flatten this out so that we can see what we're doing. And we're going to create one of these radial gradients that we did earlier. And we are going to connect that in to the multiply. Let's multiply this by the alpha. That way we can control it all. And then we're going to connect that to our opacity. Okay. And actually, I'm going to change my lighting mode to be unlit, I think. And we're going to connect our RGB into our emissive color, maybe? Is that what I want to do? Well, we'll try both ways. Let's start with lit, and then we'll see where we get to. Let's disconnect emissive for right now. We have RGB, we have our gradient. Let's take a look at what settings we want to use for this. So we'll go ahead and create the same thing we did before. I held 1 and left click to do that. We have a radius and a density. Let's go ahead with a radius of 0.5 and a density of 10, for example. And then that's going to feed in, and we should be good to go there. Okay, so now that we have our material, we can actually apply this material to our fog of war system. So for our sprite renderer, we can change this to fog of war, and this is going to be the particle transparent. All right, so this, the edge of this is going to be a little bit sharper, but still looks pretty good. However, actually we didn't update it. This is one example of something just to watch out for. You saw we updated our fog of war emitter, but look at what happened in our system. If we look at the sprite render for our system, it's still the default sprite. For some reason, even though I didn't override this, it kept the material that I already had in here. So I'm going to click this green arrow, and what that's going to do is it's going to reset it back to the emitter. So compile and save, and now when we go and play, we can see the edge of our particle is a little bit more rigid. Now we're going to clean this up a little bit because we're going to actually put in a fog. So let's go back to our fog of war. We don't need our Imageplane material open anymore. We don't need our masked one. We don't need our fog of war one. We want this one. Okay. So let's add in kind of a cloudy effect. So let's go ahead and right click and do a texture parameter. So I want to use a texture to do this, and I want to be able to specify the texture whenever I want to. And in this case, let's just take a default dust as a stand-in. So over here on the left, there's a dust that comes with the system. And all I'm going to do is I am going to try to connect this dust in so that this has a little bit more variance, if you will. So if we just take and we multiply these two together, wherever dust is black, that will kind of fade it out, and we can start previewing it, and you can see what that looks like. Okay, now the trick is we want to actually connect this in. Okay, so that's all good. Then we're going to take and we're going to multiply by the alpha of the particle, which is good because we want to still be able to fade it in. We can stop previewing. And now you'll see that we have a kind of more of a cloudy looking particle. So if we apply that, and we go back, you'll see this already looks like it's more like a cloud. It's already looking cool. Okay, now it's still fairly circular for me. You would probably want a much more like varied edged, like a edge varied texture, for example. There are a couple things that we could do. We could change the contrast, etc. But I think for now, just understand that you can kind of sculpt this. You can even put in basically sprite images, which are actually moving clouds, for example. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually make it so that these clouds are moving. So let's go ahead and add in a panner. So in our material world, what we can do is we can have a panner. It's called connected to our UVs. And for the speed, let's just do, for the sake of time, I'm going to fast track. Let's go 0.05 and apply it. Now, when we look at this, actually that's going to be really hard for you all to see. Let's go 1 so you can see it. See how fast it's moving? Actually, that's 15. See how fast that's moving? That's going to be too fast. Our fog of war is going to look like it's super frenetic. So let's go 0.05, just so it's subtle. Okay? And then we'll go back to our deal. And you can see that the fog feels like it's moving now. Okay? Which is great. And then let's go ahead and make sure that our material is connected in properly. We do have our alpha. We're multiplying it in. We're going ahead and connecting that to the opacity. And we also have our scaling of color, blending in. That all looks good. Okay, compile and save. So that's it for this kind of fog of war with a translucent edge, which is cool. All right, now one more quick check of our overdraw for fun. And we are still extremely bad. So just like we did with the planar cutout, we can also do this masked as well. So let's go ahead and do this exact same thing, but this time let's do it masked. So let me just apply this, save this, browse to this. I'm going to take this material, I'm going to duplicate it, I'm going to call this masked, just so you can quickly see the difference. And then in the masked version, what I'm going to do is we're going to change this to be, oh, actually, you know what? There's one other thing I wanted to try before we did the mask. Let's take this and go unlit. So we made it unlit. And if we go F5, no change. Okay, so it doesn't look like it has any effect as far as that's concerned. Okay, so cool. All right, so back to our masked version. So our masked version, what we're going to do is we change this from translucent to masked. We can do unlit probably, which is good. And then the mask, we need to connect it. Now we're going to have a little bit of a problem. And the reason for that is because when this gets masked off, we only get a much smaller portion of our masking. And the reason for that is because what's actually happening is remember, masking works as 0 or 1. It's either on or off. So if it's 0.5, it's on, and if it's less than that, it's off, for example. So as a result of that, we're getting a lot less kind of definition. So we're going to do some crazy stuff here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use that same dither to create a region that we can work with. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So this is the flat plane. We can see basically nothing on this plane. That doesn't help us. Here's what I want to do. This is our exponential circle, our radial gradient, I'm sorry. If I start previewing this, start previewing. Why can't I preview this? Interesting. Classic, close it and reopen it. Let's try that. There we go. Every now and then that happens. So what we have is we have our circle. All right, now what I want to do is I want to basically do that dither effect kind of around the edge of where this white circle hits the edge, not throughout the whole thing. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take 2 of these, and I'm going to make one big one and one small one, and then I'm going to subtract them from each other. So this one's going to be 0.3 and 5.0. And if we start previewing this one, watch the size change. Oh man, are we going to have to close and open this each time? That's going to be a bummer. Let me close this. Let's save all. I'm starting to be suspicious of my machine resources. But the overall point here is if we look at this one, flat, that's a smaller circle than this one, which is bigger. Okay? So what we're going to do is we are going to take these two and subtract them from each other. So take this, subtract from this one. Now what this is going to do is it's going to create a ring. I'm going to use this ring to limit the effect of where our panner stuff is happening. Okay, so let's take this subtract and multiply it by our cloud, if you will. So when we look at this, so now all of our clouds are limited to be inside that ring. And then what we're going to do with that is we are going to take that and we're going to add it to these two multiplied together, which is this one and this one. So these two multiplied together, just so you know, is somewhere, it's a circle that is about halfway between. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm going to add with the plus sign. Let's add this ring to here. Okay, and now you can see we have kind of like this solid inner circle and a semi-faded cloudy edge. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to feed this into our dither node like we were doing before. Now if we take this, now here's one thing to note. Right now there is a possibility that by doing this multiplication and this add, right? Wait, didn't I do an add? Multiply, oh yeah, this add right here, the one I was clicking on, it is possible that our values are greater than 1. So what we want to do is we want to clamp that so it only goes to 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a saturate in here. Now, why do I know to do a saturate? The reason I'm using saturate is this is effectively a fast, cheap clamp node, effectively. And so all it does, it's going to be the same thing, but what it does is it ensures that all the values are from 0 to 1. That way when we feed it into the dither, what's going to happen is we can feed this into our multiply for our opacity mask, and we can stop previewing, and we now have, you can see kind of like this black, mostly solid inner circle with kind of like an outer rim to it, which is kind of what I was hoping for. All right, now the radius, is there anything else I want to change on this? I think let's go ahead and do, I don't think this is going to change anything. If we change our random, let's just see what changes if we do this. Yeah, that doesn't change anything. Okay, so now that we have this material, what we can do is we can take this and plug this into our Niagara system. But before I do this, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. How in the world did I know about how to add all these things together and how to think about it? I'm completely making this stuff up. And what I mean by that is there are talented artists, tech artists, everybody who understand all the ins and outs of all this material stuff. The way I have generally found that I work through this is I kind of envision in my head what I think it's doing, and I use this preview node to figure out, like, start previewing here. And so what I'll do is I'll right click and I'll start previewing. Okay, it's a sphere or a circle. Great. Now if I take that and I subtract another circle from it, that makes sense to me. I can visually think about that. Okay, cool, that's what I want. And I want to use that as a mask for my clouds, and if I'll start previewing that, that's doing exactly what I want. So I kind of am stumbling through this as I go to figure out what it's doing, and I often, the material space is, it breaks the fourth wall, it has a fourth dimension, because not only is it color, but it also works in dimension as well. So generally speaking, I will have fairly simple material graphs. I basically step through them like this, just thinking about the result of multiplying white, which is actually 1 by blue or green or whatever it happens to be, and going from there. Okay, so, and then there are certain things that I have picked up just by being surrounded by material experts, like for example this saturate node. I did not realize that this was a much more cost effective from a performance standpoint version of doing a clamp, for example. So do not think I just know how all this stuff works. I'm truly in this with you all. We're just kind of stumbling through this. The only reason this looks like I know what I'm doing is because I have literally been through this a bunch of times at this point as a result of prepping, crashing, and everything else. So there is hope. You all will be able to wrap your heads around this as well. So start, save all, etc. Let's go back to our fog of war. Once again, we're going to update our sprite render this time to be our masked version. Okay, apply and compile. One thing I want to mention is, remember, our system doesn't actually update, right? It still has a transparent one on it. If we reset the system, it goes to the masked version. Compile and save. We are so close to being done. Moment of truth. Bingo. Okay, so now we have fog of war that is using a masked material for the particle system. So all of the things that we learned when we were using the plane with masks and transparency, it all still also applies to the particles as well. So let's see where we are time-wise. Not too bad. Not too bad. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to cover with you all in this before we wrap this up. Okay, we have our particles, we have our system, we have our VFX fog of war. Let me double check my notes real quick. Blueprint interfaces. That's it, y'all. I think we did it. So this was actually a lot of fun. I hopefully, you know, approaching all these different methods of achieving the same thing, they're all applicable. They all can be used. And which method I use, by the way, will vary greatly depending on what kind of game I'm making. What I mean by that is, it is very difficult to use the plane method when you're making a third-person game. Because where do you put the plane? How does that work? So you're probably going to have to use something that's a little bit more volume-based. Whereas the Imageplane trick, basically the pinhole camera trick, we could use that on a 2D scroller. Why not? The cool thing about the Niagara one and the effects one is it actually has the ability to do both. You could do a complete total reveal fog of war, as well as a fog of war that fills back in as you move through the space. Now, one of the cool things about that is I've often heard another way of setting up fog of war is basically putting little particle systems all throughout all throughout the level, either particle systems or actors that are like basically image planes and things like that. So you put those throughout the level, and then what you do is as you walk through those, you'll just turn them off and on as you basically go through and overlap them. I think this is actually a much cooler, more artistic way of doing it, and you can get as crazy as you want. Although, you know, from an arts and crafts standpoint, don't forget gameplay is king. But you could make each of these little clouds so much more appealing. They could be poofy little clouds and so on. So that's going to wrap up today's tutorial. As always, I want to give a shout out to the community. Thanks for being part of this adventure. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the feedback. All the feedback helps make sure that I don't hopefully make the same mistakes on the next video. So I very much appreciate everybody's time, everybody's help in Discord, and all those kinds of things. As always, I hope everybody has an amazing rest of your week, a great weekend, and I will catch you on the next one. The next one, I think we're going to probably take a look at a more true fog volume-based version of Fog of War, or maybe start getting into some of the more trickier blueprint-based visibility type things. So, as always, Thanks for being part of this adventure. I'll see you all in the next one. Take it easy.